We are going to continue reading The Wind and the Willows with Kenneth Grahame. Okay. Excuse me. Well, well, said the rat. I suppose that we ought to be moving. I wonder which of us had better pack under the luncheon basket. He did not speak as if he was frightfully eager for a treat. Oh, please let me, said Mole. So, of course, Rat let him. Unpacking the basket, it never is. But the Mole was bent on enjoying everything. And although it was just when he had got the basket packed and strapped up tightly, he saw a plate stirring up at him from the grass. When the job had been done, again, the rat pointed out a fork which anybody ought to have seen, and at last, behold, the mustard pot, which he had been sitting on without knowing it. Still, somehow, the thing got finished at last, without much loss of temper. The afternoon sun was getting low, and the rat sculled gently homewards in a dreamy mood, murmuring poetry things over to himself, and not paying much attention to Mole. But Mole was very full of lunch and self-satisfaction and pride, and already quite at home in a boat. And so he thought, and was getting a bit restless besides. And presently he said, Ratty, please, I want to row now. And the rat shook his head with a smile. Not yet, my young friend, he said. Wait till you've had a few lessons. It's not so easy as it looks. The Mole was quiet for a minute or two, and he began to feel more jealous of Rat, sculling so strongly, so easily along, as his pride began to whisper that he could do it every bit as well. He jumped up and seized the sculls so suddenly that the rat, who was gazing out over the water and saying more poetry things to himself, was taken by surprise and fell backwards off his seat with his legs in the air for the second time, while the triumphant Mole took his place and grabbed the sculls with the entire confidence. Stop it, you silly ass, cried the rat from the bottom of the boat. You can do it. You'll have us over. The Mole flung his sculls back with a flourish and made a great dig in the water. He missed the surface altogether. His legs flew up over his head, and he found himself laying on the top of the prostrate rat. Greatly alarmed, he made a grab of the side of the boat, and the next moment, sploosh, went over the boat and found himself struggling in the river. Oh my, how cold the water was, and oh, how very wet it felt. How it sang in his ears as he went down, down, down. How bright and welcome the sun looked as he rose to the surface, coughing and sputtering. How black his despair when he felt himself sinking again. Then a firm paw gripped him by the back of his neck. It was Rat. He evidently was laughing. The Mole could feel him laughing right down his arm and through his paw, and so on into his Mole's neck. The rat got a hold of the skull and shoved it under the Mole's arm, and then he did the same thing on the other side. Swimming behind the propelled and helpless animal to shore, hauled him out and set him down on the bank, a squishy, pulpy lump of misery. When the rat had rubbed him down a bit, and wrung some of the wet fur out of him. He said, "Now then, old fellow, trot up and down in the towing path as hard as you can till you warm up and dry again, while I drive home for luncheon basket." So the dismal mole, wet without a shame and ashamed, would then trotted about till his fairly dry, while the rat plunged into the water. Again, recovered the boat, retied her, and made her fast, fetched his floating property to shore by degrees, and finally divided successfully for the luncheon basket and struggled to the land with it. When all was ready for a start once more, the mole, limp, dejected, took his seat in the stern of the boat, and they set off. He said in a low voice, broken with emotion, "Ratty, my generous friend, I'm very sorry indeed for my foolish, ungrateful conduct. My heart quite fails me when I think of how I might have lost that beautiful luncheon basket. Indeed, have been a complete ass, and I know it. Will you overlook it at once and forgive me and let things go on as before?" "That's all right, bless you," responded the rat cheerfully. "What's a little wet to do to a water rat? I'm more than watered out of it most days. Don't you think any more about it? And look here, I really think you had better come to stop with me for a little time. It's very plain and rough, not like Toad's house at all, but you haven't seen it yet. Still, I can make you comfortable, and I'll teach you to row and to swim, and you'll soon be a handy on the water like any of us." Sorry. The mole was so touched by his kind manner of speaking that he could find no voice to answer him, and he had to brush away to tear or a tear or two with the back of his paw. But the rat kindly looked another direction, and presently the mole's spirit revived again, and he was even able to give some straight back talk to a couple of morons who were sniggering at each other about his begaggled appearance. When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlor and planted the mole in the armchair in the front, having fetched down a dressing gown and slippers for him, and told him river stories till supper time. Very thrilling stories they were, too. An earth-dwelling animal like a mole. Stories about wires and sudden floods and leaping pike and streams that flung hard bottles. At least bottles were certainly flung from streamers, so presumably by them. And about the herons and how particular they were, whom they spoke to. "Hello, Ari." Whom they spoke to, and about the adventures down drains, night fishings with otter, and or excursions far afield with badger. Supper was most cheerful meal, but very shortly after, terribly sleepy Mole had to be escorted upstairs by his considerate host to the bedroom, where he soon laid his head in his pillow in great peace and contentment, knowing that his new-found friend, the river, was lapping still at his window. This day was the only day of many similar ones for the emancipated mole, each of them longer and full of interest as the ripening summer moved onward. He learned to swim and row and entered into the joy of running water. With his ear to the reed streams, he caught at intervals something of what the wind went whispering so constantly among them. All right, you guys. Tomorrow we will continue The Open Road. Have a crispy night. Good night and thanks for listening.